People often give legacy automakers a really big leg up when it comes to manufacturing electric vehicles to compete with Tesla. But that's really not the case. In fact, as Sandy Munro says, they all pretty much are at the starting line together, and actually EV startups might have a leg up on legacy auto. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I'm going to start with that 30-second clip of Sandy Munro talking. He's talking on the Fully Charged podcast. It's a much longer interview. They get into a whole bunch of stuff, so I highly recommend watching the entire video. Of course, I'll put a link to that in the description. But anyway, I just want to touch on the part that Sandy Munro is discussing right here. So let's take a look at that first.
But we do have the Rivian, which I think is great. I think that anytime you look at a car coming from even a startup company, like you mentioned Lucid and things like that, anything you see like that coming from a startup company is actually about the same as where you'd find the GMs, the Fords, the BMWs, whomever. They're in the same ballpark. So even the older established OEMs are what I think, when they bring out their new cars, I think they're kind of like novices. Maybe the build of the car is wonderful, but I will tell you that what's underneath the skin is in its infancy.
So what Sandy Munro is saying here, and remember, he's an engineering expert with decades and decades of experience in this stuff, so he really knows what he's talking about here. He's basically saying that ICE, or internal combustion engine manufacturing vehicles like Ford, GM, Toyota, Hyundai, etc., all of those car companies have massive experience in terms of building ICE vehicles. In other words, they build vehicles around internal combustion engines, and that gives them a gigantic leg up. If I was going to start a new car company, and God forbid I wanted to make it with internal combustion engines as opposed to battery electric, I would never be able to start a company successfully against these guys. They have got up to 100 years plus of experience in building really high quality vehicles. And that's not just companies like BMW and Mercedes, etc., that obviously have experience making high-end vehicles. Even companies like Volkswagen, Toyota, GM, Ford, etc., they have decades up to 100 plus years of learning how to build very fine products, and often for reasonable prices, right? I mean, you can get vehicles like a Toyota Camry for not all that much money that, while they're kind of boring vehicles and not very exciting, they're really well put together and they're going to last 10 or 15 years, assuming you take any kind of reasonable care of that. So yes, it would be very difficult for a startup company to compete with these companies because they really know what they're doing. They're very good at putting together parts that other people have built into a very attractive package and making sure that it looks really good and all the fit and finish is excellent. What Sandy Munro and I are talking about here, however, is taking the playing field and moving it, right? So we're talking about internal combustion engine cars, and suddenly we're going like, no, we're not playing American football, we're playing European football, right? We're moving from ICE cars to BEV cars. And yeah, the field kind of looks the same. I mean, you've got more or less the same dimensions. It's grass, it's a pitch, whatever. There's a stand, there's people who watch. But the sport itself couldn't be more different, right? Football for the rest of the world, or soccer as we call it in the United States, is something where you kick a round ball and you run around and you can't use your hands except for throw-ins and the goalies. And obviously American football is throwing and passing and tackling each other and crunching and all of that kind of stuff. So obviously very different games. And if you were trained and a professional athlete in one, that's not going to give you that big of a leg up in the other sport. If you take a world-class soccer club and you put them in an arena against a professional football team, they're going to get decimated, right? It doesn't matter that they're really good athletes, they're just not trained for that sport. So obviously they're not going to do that well. And this is what's going on here. The cars on the outside look the same, but everything inside, the field that they're playing on, is a whole different field. So suddenly we've got these companies that are really good at American football, and they're trying to jump ship and become really good at playing football or soccer around the rest of the world. They're just not going to be very good at it. They don't have the tools, they don't have the right training, etc. So the problem is that all of these guys, even though you think a company like Ford or GM is way out in front of a company like Rivian or Lucid or all of the Chinese startups, they're actually really at a pretty even starting line. And obviously Tesla is way out in front because they've been doing this for 2 decades now. But basically everybody else is at the starting line. Tesla in the meantime is halfway around the track. I'm mixing my sports metaphors here. What am I going to say? But anyway, Tesla's about to lap everybody on this track, but everybody else is just coming out of the gate. Nobody really has an advantage. And yes, there are some advantages for legacy automotive. I mean, they do have supply chain, they do have relationships with a lot of their building suppliers, they have money, they have a lot of reputation, so there are things that give them advantages, but they also have massive disadvantages. They have a huge amount of people who work for them that are not trained at all in creating battery electric vehicles. They don't know what they're doing. So they have a whole bunch of overhead that they basically have to deal with. They've got this sort of top-heavy structure where they've got a bunch of older factory workers who've been working for years and they really know what they're doing and they're excellent at what they do. And I'm not knocking any of that, but suddenly when they transition, again, you're taking professional athletes from one field and putting them onto another field playing another game. Sure, they may be the best of what they do, but they're not good at the new thing. So all of these employees actually end up becoming a liability rather than an asset. And in addition to that, you've got a bunch of old factories that were really good at manufacturing ICE cars, but they're not good at BEV cars. And a lot of these companies like Volkswagen are spending billions of dollars retooling a whole bunch of factories when Tesla has shown us that the correct way to do this is actually just to build it from the ground up as a whole new factory, because the entire pipeline's not even the same between ICE and BEV types of vehicles. So basically what Tesla is saying is, look, we bought the NUMMI plant from Toyota and GM back in the mid-2000s, and we did the best we could, but we're still fighting against the footprint that was not designed properly. And when you look at Shanghai, and especially at Berlin and Austin, they have redesigned these factories from the ground up to be really, really good at building BEVs specifically. And that's something that these other car companies need to do. And instead of retooling these factories and trying to get the old footprint to work with the new type of thing, they should just scrap it and start over again. But of course, up front, that looks like a lot more money and a lot more risk. But ultimately, it's going to be less money and less risk if they do it that way. So they've got the wrong athletes and they've got the wrong field. And that's a pretty big disadvantage, which is something that startup companies actually have an advantage in, right? A company like Rivian or Lucid or these Chinese companies, again, they can build these factories from the ground up to be the way they're supposed to be. And in addition, they've got the athletes, they've got the engineers who are already skilled at batteries, at constructing electric motors, and on and on and on. So they've got the right players, they can build the right field. And yeah, of course, a lot of these companies won't survive because it's super cash intensive to create these vehicles. But the companies that do survive have just as good a chance of being the Rivians and Lucids of the world as they do of being the Fords and GMs. Now, just like Sandy Munro, I think Ford actually of the American car companies has the best chance. I think Stellantis is already pretty much down the toilet, even though I'm not sure they're American anymore, but whatever they are. Whatever that group is, they're in really bad shape. And then GM is in really, really bad shape too, even though they're not admitting it. And then of course, if you turn to global things like VW and Toyota and Honda, etc., those companies are also having a really bad day as well. So if we stretch this football metaphor even further, we've got Tesla that got the best soccer players in the world like 8 or 10 years ago, and they've been practicing and just getting better and better and better at playing, and they've got a really brand spanking new field that they're playing on. And everybody else is kind of taking the leftovers, the dropouts from different teams and things, trying to throw them together in an emergency thing, and they're playing on a crappy field with a bunch of holes in it and things. So it's no wonder that these two teams are not really competing, even though they look like they're playing the same sport, you know, they're building cars, they're not really competing. But the interesting part is that scrappy little companies like Rivian, Lucid, etc. can get a new team. If they have enough money, they can get a new team that's a really good team. They don't have to worry about the old cruft and the old management and all of that kind of stuff. And they can build themselves a new field, again, stretching this metaphor to death here. But anyway, they can create all of these things and they have just as good a chance of competing with each other, probably not Tesla, but at least to come in second or third or whatever. They have just as good a chance as all of these legacy auto manufacturers. And I think, in fact, they actually have a better chance because they don't have so much overhead and so much cruft and so much debt from many, many years of mismanagement. So again, while it might seem from the outside outside like everybody's playing on the same field. They're all building cars. They all have doors. They all have windows. They all have tires, etc. They are not building the same thing anymore. And that is the big difference. And what people aren't recognizing is that these legacy auto manufacturers are in really big trouble already, but nobody seems to notice except for people like Sandy Monroe. So that's what Sandy thinks. That's what I think. That's what a lot of people on YouTube think as well. I would be interested to know what you all think as well. So definitely let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. If you did, please do like it so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And of course, if you want to join the team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, Success is a Possible Outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a Powerwall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.